What kind of man lets another grown man raise his family for him? The question sliced through the candlelit dining room like glass shattering on stone. For a moment, forks froze in midair, and even the children stopped whispering. I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting for me to laugh it off, to swallow the insult the way I had swallowed so many others. But my chest tightened with the weight of 15 years of quiet sacrifice, mortgage checks, school tuition, medical bills, all signed by my hand, never theirs. Across the table, Nathan, my son-in-law, smirked. He tapped the rim of his glass with a finger, the grin spreading wider as if he had finally spoken the truth no one else dared to say. My daughter Claire lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning red, torn between loyalty to her husband and shame for me. Go on, Arthur, Nathan pushed, voice dripping with scorn. Tell us how it feels to spend your golden years doing nothing, while I'm the one building this family's future. They vendu through process. I placed my knife down with care. The chandelier light caught the edge of the silverware, and in its reflection I saw not weakness, but resolve. My grandson Noah's small hand brushed against mine under the table, searching for reassurance. I looked at Nathan, steady, unflinching. Do you really want to know how it feels? My voice was calm, but inside me the storm was breaking. It feels like carrying another man's pride for so long, he forgets who held him up. And tonight, Nathan, it ends. We won to Capri. The room went silent. Claire's breath hitched. Noah's eyes widened, and Nathan's smug grin faltered for the first time. I stood, folded my napkin, and placed it gently on the table. Enjoy your wine, I said. Tomorrow you'll learn what it means to pay your own way. And that of the Stein. I should have walked out that night and never looked back. But as I stepped into the cold air, I realized you cannot simply abandon blood without reckoning. That was my daughter in there, sitting beside the man who humiliated me. Those were my grandchildren staring at me, caught between loyalty and confusion. And the truth is, I had built that entire household with my money, my sacrifices, my promise to a woman now gone. My name is Arthur Hayes, 71 years old, widowed for over a decade. I worked 43 years as a civil engineer. The bridges I designed still carry thousands of cars every day. But in that room, with the polished table and glittering glasses, none of it mattered. Nathan, my son-in-law, made sure of that. Claire is my only child. When she married Nathan 15 years ago, she swore he was ambitious, hardworking, the kind of man who would protect her. Back then, he was polite, humble, driving a rusty pickup and talking about his dreams. I wanted to believe in him. I had just buried my wife, Margaret. After her short fight with cancer, Claire was fragile, young, already carrying their first child. I promised Margaret on her deathbed that I would make sure our daughter and her family were secure. So I opened my checkbook, and I never closed it again. Tonight, as I replayed Nathan's mocking voice, I thought of the years behind me, the house they live in, the cars in their driveway. My monthly transfers kept them from repossession. The private schools for Noah and Grace. My signature kept the tuition flowing. The vacations, the kitchen remodel, the clothes, the insurance premiums, every luxury that filled their lives had my fingerprints on it. But at the table, Nathan puffed his chest and declared himself the provider. He spoke about six-figure salaries, promotions, expensive wines. He smirked as though he had carried Claire and the children through storms with his bare hands. And Claire stayed silent. She sat there, jewelry glittering on her wrist, a necklace I had once given her, eyes downcast while her husband dismantled me with words. It was not just arrogance. It was betrayal. I looked at Noah, 12 years old, thoughtful beyond his years, and Grace, only 9, still clinging to innocence. They stared wide-eyed, trying to understand why their father was laughing while their mother trembled. I wanted to shield them from it, but I knew the truth was already leaking into their world. The neighborhood they live in, the fine schools, the polished home all built on my back. And yet in that room, I was treated as if I were a burden, a man past his usefulness. I drove home in silence that night, the road blurring under the winter sky. My modest house felt smaller than ever, but at least it was mine, paid for by my own labor. I sat at the kitchen table, stared at the empty chair across from me where Margaret once sat, and whispered to her picture. I kept my promise, but they forgot. And for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than grief or duty. I felt anger. I did not sleep. I sat in my study and opened the cabinet that holds my years. I keep everything. Receipts, bank letters, scans in folders with tidy names. The lamp warmed the paper. The pages smelled like old glue and ink. I took a breath and began to count. The first file was the house. 15 years ago, Claire called me in tears. The lender had refused them. I wired the down payment. After that, I sent a transfer each month. $3,000 on the first. Like clockwork. When Nathan changed jobs, I paid extra so they would not be late. I remember a winter when pipes burst and a crew had to come at night. I covered the repair and I replaced their water heater in the spring. Next came the cars. The little pickup died. I co-signed for a sedan so Claire could drive the kids to school. When the payment rose, I made up the gap. When Nathan wanted a new SUV, my name went on the lease. I told him to shop careful. He chose the trim with leather seats. The salesman shook my hand and looked only at me. School took its own drawer. I kept the acceptance letters with pride, the uniforms, the field trips, the tablets, the summer camps. I wrote checks for all of it. When fees went up without notice, I drove across town and paid at the office. I learned the names of the secretaries and the security guard who held the door for me when my knees were stiff. Another drawer was medicine. Asthma inhalers for Noah when the smoke from the fires was bad. Braces for Grace when her teeth would not set right. Clinic bills when a fever came on a Saturday night. I kept my phone by the bed for those calls. I never let them hear worry in my voice. I only said it will be fine, and then I made it fine. There were other things. The soft things that do not look like rescue until you add them up. Groceries. When the paycheck ran short at the end of the month. Winter coats when a storm turned early. A tutor when algebra made Noah feel small. Piano lessons. When Grace cried because the class would not let her in late. Gas cards, gift cards, cash folded into a napkin at a restaurant, so Claire would not argue with me in front of the children. I found a folder marked Margaret. My hand shook when I opened it. In it was her letter, written the week before she left us. She thanked me for choosing her the day we were young and for choosing her again each long day of our life. She asked for one last choice. Take care of our girl until she can stand without you. Not forever. Until she can stand. I had read that line 100 times, and still I honored it like a law I could not change. Tonight, the words felt different. They felt like a clock that had been ringing for years while I held the pillow over the bell. I ran a column of figures. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, cars, school, medicine. Every total ended with my name. My savings showed the cost. I kept my house small. I fixed my own roof with a neighbor on a ladder. I drove the same old sedan past its 10th winter. I canceled a river trip that Margaret and I had planned, and I never tried to plan it again. I told myself it was what love looks like after the vows are over. I told myself that Claire would learn, and that Nathan would grow into the weight I had placed in his hands. The numbers on the page told me a different story. Now the papers lay in stacks like quiet witnesses. I imagined the faces of the people at that long table. Nathan with his grin, Claire with her held breath, the children waiting for peace that never arrives. I closed the cabinet and locked it. I stood in the doorway of the study and looked at the life I had built with the same calm hands that had built bridges. Those bridges still stand. So will I. I thought back to the first months after Margaret passed. Claire called every 2 days. She said thank you so many times the word sounded new. Nathan came on Saturdays to cut my grass and fix the steps. He brought coffee and asked me about my projects. He called me sir. Then the visits slowed. The thank you notes stopped. Requests arrived as statements. We need help with the roof. The kids need new tablets. The bank fee hit again. I was already reaching for my checkbook before the last sentence ended. I learned the rhythm of their bills better than the rhythm of my own days. On the 1st, I paid the house. On the 5th, I paid the insurance. On the 10th, I sent the tuition. On the 15th, I cleared the cards that carried groceries and gas. By the end of each month, I could tell when a surprise would come. I kept a small ledger in the kitchen drawer. When I opened it, the paper felt warm from my hand. Sometimes, I tried to set a line. I would say no to a trip or a new phone. A week later, there would be a crisis. A tire would blow. A crown would break. A fee would threaten to pull them under. I told myself that the timing was bad luck. I told myself that I could not stand by while they suffered. I was right about that, but I was also teaching them a lesson I did not mean to teach. That their safety net would never fail. I am not a saint. I was also afraid. Afraid that if I pulled back, they would fall and I would be blamed. Afraid that the kids would suffer and look at me with those hurt eyes. Afraid that Margaret would not forgive me if I let our promise break. So I kept going. I put 1 month after another, like stones, in a path that led away from my own needs. When I finished sorting the files, my desk looked like a map. Every road ran through me. Every bridge was held by my name. I closed my eyes and pictured the letter again. Until she can stand. I had turned until into forever. That was my fault. Tonight I decided to correct it. The next family dinner came only a week later. I almost did not attend. But when Claire called, her voice tight, I agreed. Something in me wanted to face them again. Not with papers in a drawer, but with the weight of truth in my chest. Their dining room looked the same as always. Polished wood table, crystal glasses lined like soldiers, and a chandelier that threw too much light on every nervous smile. The children sat on one side, restless but quiet. Claire fussed over the roast. Nathan poured himself another tall glass of wine before anyone else had touched theirs. He cleared his throat as if he were standing before an audience at work. "I've been thinking," he began, his words carrying that familiar edge. "It's time for some honesty in this family." His eyes flicked toward me. Real men provide. They don't coast through retirement while the rest of us do the heavy lifting. I felt the room tighten. Claire's hand shook as she passed the bread. The twins shifted in their seats. Nathan's chest swelled as though the silence was applause. "Dad had a career," Claire whispered, trying to cut him off. "A career 40 years ago." Nathan shot back, smirking. "Look, no offense, Arthur, but what was the last thing you built that mattered? When was the last time you earned instead of existed? Thanks for watching." The words landed like blows. I heard the scrape of Oliver's fork against his plate, the gasp from little Grace, the awkward cough from Claire. Nathan leaned back, enjoying himself. He thought he was untouchable in that chair, in that house, under that roof I had paid for. I set down my glass. "You want honesty?" My voice was steady. "Here it is. I am done. Every check, every payment, every safety net I've stretched under you gone. As of tonight. Had hears that is madness. The smirk faltered. Claire's eyes widened. Dad, she whispered, her lips trembling. Nathan tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. You can't just, I can, I said. And I just did. You called me useless, a failure, a man coasting through life. From this moment, you'll discover what it feels like when the man you mocked no longer pays your bills. He once sov. The silence was sharp enough to cut. Grace began to cry softly. Oliver's jaw clenched. Claire covered her mouth with both hands. Nathan's face turned red, then pale, then red again as he searched for a reply. I stood, placed my napkin neatly on the table, and looked at my daughter one last time. I loved your mother, I told her. My voice, softer now. I promised her I would help you until you could stand on your own. 15 years later, you still lean on me. That ends tonight. And I didn't know the hold. Then I walked away. The scrape of my chair echoed in the stunned room. No one followed. The November air outside felt cleaner than it had in years. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like a failure. I felt like a man reclaiming his dignity. The phone rang before sunrise the next morning. I knew it would. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling in my hands, waiting for the storm. When I answered, Claire's voice came through, sharp and panicked. Dad. The bank called. They said the mortgage payment bounced. Did something happen with your account? I let the silence stretch. She had never once asked me if I was okay. Only if the money was there. Dad, she pressed, her tone climbing. I canceled it. I said simply. The line went quiet. I could almost hear her heart pounding. You can't just, I can. I replied. And I did. Ably done. By noon, Nathan's voice thundered through my phone. He was less polished than at the dinner table. His words jagged with panic. Arthur, whatever game you're playing, it ends now. You don't get to destroy our family over some bruised feelings. Ably done. This isn't a game, I said, steady as steel. It's reality. For 15 years I've carried you. Now you'll carry yourselves. There's not no Ani, he cursed. Threatened lawyers. Shouted about verbal contracts and obligations. I listened until he ran out of air. Show me the contract, I said. Then hung up. The calls didn't stop. Claire again in the evening. Her voice cracking now. Begging me to think of the children. Noah has tuition due Friday. Grace's recital fees, Dad. Please. They'll be humiliated. There's not no Ani. They'll survive humiliation, I answered. Better to be embarrassed than to live in lies. 8. By the end of the week, the dominoes began to fall. A letter arrived from the school about late payments. A notice from the insurance company about cancellation. Even the car lease company called me because my name was on the documents. I told them to speak with Nathan directly from now on. Claire showed up at my door 2 nights later. Eyes swollen, holding the children's hands. She didn't ask to come in, she demanded. How could you do this to us? She said, voice shaking with both rage and fear. I gestured to the children. To you? Or to them? Because I see 2 kids who deserve parents who stand on their own feet. He's Fanchins. Noah looked at me with confusion, searching for an anchor. Grace buried her face against her mother's coat, whimpering. Claire tried to hold herself tall, but her shoulders betrayed her, slumping under the weight of her own choices. I kept you safe, I told her softly. I gave you everything I had so you would find your strength. Instead, you let him mock me at my own table. You let him call me useless while living off my hand. That ends now. Claire. And not again. Her tears spilled. She pulled the children close and stormed back down the steps. Nathan's car idling at the curb. His eyes met mine for only a second through the windshield. Anger, fear, and something else he couldn't hide. Panic. As the car pulled away, I felt the house grow still again, for the first time in years. The silence was mine alone. It was heavy, but it was honest. The tow truck came just after sunrise. I heard chains before I saw orange lights slide across my wall. I pulled back the curtain. The street was quiet and thin. Frost silvered the lawns. The truck backed into Claire's driveway with a slow hum. The driver stepped down, checked a clipboard, and rolled a metal arm under the shiny SUV. He crouched, clicked, and the steel lifted. The front door burst open. Nathan ran outside in bare feet, tie hanging from his collar. He shouted and waved his arms. A man from the lease company stood beside the truck in a dark jacket. He did not argue. He pointed at the papers and waited. Claire came to the porch with the children behind her. Noah stood still, jaw tight. Grace pressed both hands over her ears as the winch pulled the car up the ramp. I stepped outside and watched from behind the hedge. I did not speak. Windows opened on the block. Nathan signed with a shaking hand. The driver locked the wheels and lowered the safety bar. The truck rolled away with their pride strapped to it. By noon, the notices began. A text from the utility about a past due balance. A letter from the insurance office with a firm date in black type. An email from the school bursar, which Claire forwarded to me without a greeting. Tuition must be cleared by Friday or the children would be removed from class on Monday. I read it twice. I love those children. I would not send money through their parents again. If I helped, it would be direct and on record. That evening I drove by to return a sweater Grace had left at my house. The curtains were open and the lights were bright. Nathan paced with a phone pressed to his ear. He lowered his voice and begged. Claire sat on the sofa with a stack of receipts on her knees. She sorted and cried. Noah stood in the doorway of the hall and counted breaths. I tapped lightly and held up the sweater. Claire opened the door and took it. She looked older than she had 1 week ago. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Hands red from scrubbing what could not be cleaned. She said thank you. Not Dad. Not please. Only thank you. I nodded. I told her the truth again. I will help the children directly. I will not fund the life that swallowed you. She nodded once, like a person hearing a verdict that is hard but fair. On Thursday, the principal called me. He used a careful voice. He said Noah had gone quiet in class. He said Grace cried in music and told a friend that her house might be taken away. He asked if there was anything the school should know. I thanked him. I told him the children would remain if I paid tuition by check to the office. He said that would be acceptable. He asked if this would be temporary. I told him it would last until their parents learned to stand. Across the street, the house became a stage with changing scenes. On Friday, a delivery truck brought a used washing machine. On Saturday, a friend dropped off flattened boxes and a roll of tape. On Sunday morning, Nathan left early in a borrowed sedan with a trash bag of clothes in the back seat. He did not look toward my porch. He stared straight ahead. That afternoon, the children sat on the front steps with school forms in their laps. Noah filled in his lines with careful block letters. Grace traced her name again and again until the paper softened at the edges. I watched from my porch and wished I could hand them ease without stealing their lesson. That night, Claire called again. Her voice was small and tired. She said the mortgage office wanted 3 payments at once or they would post a notice. She said the electric bill had not been cleared and she had finished the dishes by candlelight. She tried to laugh and failed. I listened. Then I told her what I would do and what I would not do. I would pay the school in the morning. I would refill Noah's inhaler. I would take Grace to buy shoes for Jim. I would not send money to the joint account. After we hung up, I drove to the pharmacy. The clerk knew Noah's prescription. The pharmacist bagged it and wished me a good night. I stopped at the grocery for milk, bread, and a sack of oranges. I told myself it was for the children, and it was. I also knew that Claire would slice one and remember mornings when she was young, and Margaret set a bowl on the table and said, "We begin with something honest." When I delivered the bag the next morning, Noah answered the door. He took the inhaler and held it like a tool that could fix more than air. He did not force a smile. He asked if any of this was his fault. I told him no. I told him, grown people make grown choices, and that consequences follow choices the way shadows follow light. I told him that none of this could change the way I loved him. He nodded. As I turned to leave, I saw a new paper taped to the front door. It carried a seal at the top and words that did not shout. They were plain and final. They explained what happens when promises are not kept. I sat in my car for a long minute and watched the street. I did not cry. I did not speak. I took a slow breath and chose again to be strong enough to let them learn, and soft enough to carry only the parts that belong to love. Words spread faster than I expected. By Monday evening, neighbors whispered over fences, wondering why Nathan's SUV had been repossessed, and why Claire was now driving an old sedan with a cracked bumper. Children at school whispered too. Grace came home in tears after a classmate asked if her family was going broke. That night, Claire showed up at my door again, shoulders hunched under a heavy coat. She looked at the floor when she spoke. I applied for a cashier job at the grocery store. They called me in for training tomorrow. Her voice broke on the last word. She had a college degree, years of potential. Yet here she was, begging for $12 an hour. I wanted to reach out, to rescue her again, but I held my ground. "It's honest work," I said softly. "You'll finally know what it feels like to earn. There's no shame in that." She nodded, but her eyes filled anyway. By the end of the week, I stopped by the store to see for myself. She was at the register, wearing a blue vest, hair tied back, scanning groceries with tired hands. A neighbor approached her lane, gave her a polite smile, and said, "I didn't know you were working here, Claire." I saw her cheeks burn red. She whispered, "Paper or plastic?" Without meeting their eyes, at home, Nathan was crumbling. He had built his image on borrowed wealth, and without it, the facade cracked. He stopped boasting at neighborhood barbecues. His coworkers noticed the used car, the wrinkled shirts, the way he ducked out of lunches. At a bar one night, he tried to spin lies about financial hardship, but someone reminded him of the BMW I had once co-signed. The laughter at his expense carried through town. The children were caught in the storm. Noah called me one evening, his voice low. "Grandpa, Mom and Dad fight all the time now. About bills, about you, about everything." Grace hides in her room and cries. I don't know what to do. My heart ached. But I told him the truth. "You didn't cause this. Adults make mistakes, and now they're paying for them. All you need to know is that I love you, and I will always make sure you and Grace are safe." And he can. I began to see them more often. Grace would sneak over after school for cookies at my kitchen table. Noah would sit in my study, pretending to do homework, but really just wanting the quiet. Their small voices were heavier than any numbers in my files. They spoke of exhaustion, of fear, of feeling embarrassed at school. They asked questions no child should ask. Are we going to lose our house? Why don't Mom and Dad thank you? Did we do something wrong? Each time, I reassured them, but inside, I wrestled with my own grief. I was watching my daughter and her husband collapse under the weight of choices they had made, and the weight I had shielded them from for too long. Claire began to change first, working long shifts, standing on her feet, learning to stretch small paychecks. She started to see what I had been trying to teach all along. Her voice grew softer when she spoke to me, less demanding, more humble. She once whispered, "Dad, I finally understand what sacrifice feels like, and I hate that I never saw what you were doing for us." His well-to-know why. Nathan, however, fought the fall. He clung to his pride, still muttering about bad luck, unfair systems, anyone but himself. But the mirror does not lie, and every time he looked into it now, he saw a man stripped of borrowed glory. I stood at my window one evening as dusk settled over the street. Their house, so grand with its glowing windows, looked smaller now. The lights flickered, the curtains were drawn, and the shadows inside told me arguments were erupting again. I closed my eyes and thought of Margaret. She had asked me to keep Claire secure until she could stand alone. Tonight, for the first time in years, I believed that moment might finally be coming. The knock came on a rainy Thursday evening. I had just finished dinner, the sound of the storm drumming against the windows. When I opened the door and found them both standing there, Claire's face was pale, wet from tears or from rain. I couldn't tell. Nathan hovered behind her, jaw set tight, shoulders stiff as if bracing for a blow. "Dad," Claire whispered, "please, we need to talk. Reason, as one them." I stepped aside. They entered the living room like strangers in a courtroom, nervous and restless. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa, twisting her hands. Nathan remained standing, pacing, trying to look in control, though his eyes betrayed the panic. "You've made your point," he began. His voice cracked, then steadied. "But you can't keep this up. The mortgage is 3 months late. The car is gone. The kids are suffering. You're tearing the family apart." I leaned back in my chair. "No, Nathan, I'm not tearing it apart. I'm refusing to keep propping it up." Claire reached for my hand, her grip trembling. "Dad, I can't sleep at night. The children cry themselves to bed. Grace has nightmares about moving. Noah's grades are slipping. Please, if not for us, then for them, help us. To owe anyone." I looked into her eyes, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be. The one Margaret and I promised we would always protect. My chest ached, but I knew the answer could not be simple. "I will help," I said slowly. Relief flashed across Claire's face, but I raised my hand before she could speak. "Not the way you want. Not anymore. To owe anyone." Nathan stopped pacing. "What does that mean?" "It means this," I said, my voice firm. "I will pay directly for the children, their tuition, their medical needs, their clothes, their activities. They will never go without while I'm alive. But I will not fund your mortgage, your cars, or your lifestyle. That part ends. Permanently. Mommen in the Sainchen." Nathan's face twisted. "You're dividing the family, making us look like beggars while you play hero with the kids. Mommen in the Sainchen." "No," I replied. "I'm making sure my grandchildren don't pay for your pride. Mommen in the Sainchen." Claire's tears spilled over. "Dad, we can't afford the house without you. We can't keep this life. In a 10, then you'll have to live within what you earn," I said quietly. "Like every other family in this neighborhood." In a 10, the silence thickened. Only the rain on the windows filled the room. "Finally," I added. "But there's more. If you want my support for the children, There are conditions. In a 10, Nathan scoffed. Conditions? You're in no position. I'm in every position. I cut him off. I've given nearly $1 million over 15 years. That's more than most fathers give in a lifetime. And all I've received in return is silence, entitlement, and insults at my own table. That ends now. You want my help? You will acknowledge the truth. And Claire swallowed hard. What truth? That, for all these years, it was me who kept this family standing. You will admit it to the neighbors you lied to, the friends you bragged to, the community you deceived. You will apologize publicly and sincerely for the disrespect you've shown. Hey, Nathan exploded. You want me to humiliate myself? To stand in front of everyone and say I was nothing? I met his fury with calm. I want you to say what is true. That without me, you would have drowned long ago. That you let arrogance blind you. That you mocked the hand that fed your children. You don't have to like it, Nathan. But you will do it if you want your kids to have stability. Hey, Claire buried her face in her hands. Sobbing, Nathan stared at me, chest rising and falling fast. Rage and fear colliding inside him. You have 48 hours, I said finally. Decide if your pride is worth more than your children's future. Says. The storm outside roared louder. Inside, silence weighed heavier than thunder. Nathan did not sleep after I gave them the deadline. He paced the kitchen while the rain faded on the gutters. By morning, he had a plan that sounded brave and empty. He would call a lawyer. He would call the bank. He would call his brother. The lawyer was polite and useless. There was no contract to force me to keep paying. The bank offered a plan that still required money they did not have. His brother listened 2 minutes and said he could not lend thousands. That afternoon, the house smelled like worry. Boxes sat open in the hall. Claire boiled water for tea and slid a page toward me. Mortgage past due. Utilities past due. Insurance lapsed. Tuition due Friday. She had written the numbers in pencil so she could erase and rewrite them when fees changed. Her voice was tired but steady. Without help for the adults, we cannot keep this life. I told her again I would cover the children and only the children. She nodded. Nathan came in with a stack of printouts. Payday loan offers. Balance transfers. He pushed them at me like evidence. We can bridge for a month. I pushed them back. 1 month becomes 12. 12 becomes 15 years. You know this because we already lived it. That evening, the 4 of us sat with a calculator between us. Numbers do not bend for wishes. Nathan wrote down their income. He wrote the mortgage, the car, the bills that keep a house lit. There was very little left before groceries. He could not reduce the mortgage by will. He could not turn pride into currency. Claire watched him, and something in her face softened. The children listened from the stairs. Noah came down and pulled out a chair. He is 12, but his eyes carry old weather. He asked the only question that mattered. If saying sorry keeps us in our home, why not say sorry? Grace nodded, thumb tucked under her chin. The air in the room changed. Nathan stared at his son as if a stranger had spoken a language he should have known. He tried one more road. He called his boss for an advance. He called a neighbor who liked to brag about cash. The answers were no, or yes with teeth. By Wednesday, Claire's schedule showed double shifts. She stood on aching feet and bagged groceries for people who used to invite her to wine nights. At home, she soaked her hands in warm water and stared at the wall. On Thursday, a letter arrived with an official seal. 30 days to cure the default, or the house would move from theirs to not theirs. Claire held the paper as if it might burn. Nathan read it twice and folded it so tight the edges wrinkled. That night he slept on the couch and woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling. He tried embarrassment as a shield. He went to the bar where he had bragged and told a new story. He said I had turned cruel. He said my help came with strings. Bill from the dealership was there and asked who had co-signed the old lease. The men went quiet. Stories die fast when facts walk in. He tried anger next. He left a message that began with a shout and ended with a plea. He said I would regret destroying my grandchildren's stability. I called him back and told him I had already secured the children's next term and the next dentist visit. The only unstable thing was the tower he had built on my back. The line went quiet. Then, he said a small word that sounded like a leak in a wall. Please. That night, the children called from Claire's phone. Grace asked if I could still come to her recital. Noah asked what it feels like to start over. I told them it feels like standing on cold ground at dawn. It hurts for a while. Then the sun lifts. Then the air warms. Then you are stronger than before. The deadline sat on the mantel like a clock nobody could ignore. At breakfast, Nathan stared at his reflection in the black screen of a dead tablet. Claire packed lunches and kissed two small heads. Before she left, she touched Nathan's shoulder. He flinched. She kept her hand there anyway. On the last evening, rain returned. The house creaked like a ship that had sailed too far with too much weight. Noah and Grace did homework at the kitchen table by a lamp that flickered. Nathan stood in their bedroom doorway, looking at framed photos and suit jackets that no longer fit the man he had been pretending to be. When he came down, his face had lost the hard shine that arrogance gives. He looked older and more human. He sat across from Claire and took a breath that sounded like surrender. I cannot make the numbers work. I cannot bend the bank. I cannot turn a story into a roof. Then he said the words I had been waiting to hear since the night he raised his glass and mocked me. I was wrong. Outside, the rain kept time on the porch. Inside, two adults looked at each other without defense. Then Claire nodded. Tomorrow we will go to your house. We will accept the terms. We will apologize. We will start over. I sat in my living room at the same hour, unaware of their choice, but sensing the turn, like a wind that shifts before a storm clears. I looked at Margaret's photo and whispered what I had whispered for years. I kept my promise. Now let them learn to keep theirs. Saturday morning brought them to my door. Claire's eyes were red from crying. Her hair pulled into a loose knot that made her look younger, almost like the daughter who used to run through our yard barefoot. Nathan stood beside her, not puffed up with pride this time, but hollowed out, his shoulders sagging under a weight he could not carry. They did not speak at first. They simply stood there in the silence of the street until I stepped aside and let them in. The children followed close behind, clutching their school bags, as if holding on to something familiar. We sat in the living room, the same room where Nathan had once tried to tower over me, demanding that I restore the payments. Now he could barely meet my eyes. He cleared his throat and spoke with a voice that was softer, cracked. I can't fix this. I can't pretend anymore. You were right. We built a life we couldn't afford, and I mocked you while you kept us afloat. Fine of the Lestin. Claire's tears started again. Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought love meant never saying no to us. I thought your help was endless. I never saw how much you gave up for us until I stood on my feet for 12 hours a day and still couldn't keep the lights on. Now, I know. I know what you carried all these years. Fret. Her words pierced me deeper than Nathan's insults ever had. My daughter. Finally seeing the truth. Finally speaking it out loud. I leaned forward. Do you understand now why I stopped? Yes, she whispered. Because we were drowning you while pretending we could swim. Fret. Nathan nodded. His hands clenched together, trembling. I told everyone I was the provider. I bragged about things you paid for. I made myself into a man I never was. And when I mocked you at that table, I thought it proved my strength. But it only proved my weakness. It's not Hadkane. The children sat quietly, listening. Grace finally whispered. Mom says you're helping with school. Thank you, Grandpa. I don't care if our house is smaller or our car is old. I just want us to be okay. It's not Kane. Her small voice broke the last piece of my restraint. Tears burned in my eyes, but I held them back. You will be okay, I told her, my voice low but certain. But it won't be because I carry every bill. It will be because your parents finally learned to carry their own. See, dealt. For the first time, Nathan did not argue. He bowed his head and nodded. Claire squeezed his hand. Something shifted between them. Something raw and real that had been buried under years of easy money. I can't promise I'll never stumble, Nathan said. But I can promise I will never again look at you and see anything less than the man who saved us. See, dealt. The clock on the mantel ticked. Rain tapped the window. And for the first time in years, the silence in my house felt like peace rather than loneliness. Sunday came with a gray sky and a stillness that felt like the pause before a verdict. At exactly noon, Claire and Nathan arrived with the children. This time there was no pretense. No forced smiles. No bravado. They carried the weight of what they had to do. And for once, they didn't try to hide it. We sat again in my living room, but the air felt different. Nathan's hands were empty. No glass of wine to swirl. No smirk to sharpen into a weapon. Claire clutched a folded sheet of paper. Her voice shook as she handed it to me. This is the letter for the community paper. We wrote it together. Another one. I unfolded it. The words were plain. Not poetic. But they were honest. They admitted that for 15 years I had supported their family in ways they never acknowledged. They admitted their pride had turned gratitude into entitlement. They thanked me by name, and they apologized. Nathan cleared his throat. His eyes fixed on the floor. We'll post it on our social media tonight too. And we'll tell the neighbors directly. I don't know if it will change how people look at me, but it's the truth, and it's overdue. Is no Dane. Claire's tears came again. But they were different this time, softer. Not desperate. We've accepted that our life has to change. We've started looking at smaller houses. Ones we can actually afford. I'll keep working. Nathan's applying for a second position at his company. Even if it means longer hours. We're not asking you to cover us anymore. It's not game, I nodded. My chest felt heavy, but in a way that meant release. Not burden. You'll live on what you earn. That's all I ever wanted. And in return, I'll do what I promised. I'll take care of Noah and Grace. Their tuition. Their clothes. Their activities. That much I will never stop. It's not game. The children's eyes brightened. Noah leaned forward. So we don't have to leave our school? No. I told him, smiling faintly. You'll stay right where you are. And I did this. Grace climbed into my lap and hugged me. Thank you, Grandpa. And I did this. Nathan finally raised his head. His voice was low, stripped of pride. I can't erase the years I lied about who was providing. I can't erase the way I treated you. But I will change what comes next. I will be the man my children deserve, even if it takes the rest of my life to prove it. His not. We spent the rest of that afternoon making plans. Not for payments I would send, but for routines they would follow. A monthly family dinner at my house. Budget reviews I would help Claire prepare. A clear agreement that every dollar I gave went only to the children. For the first time, it felt like a partnership, not a dependency. When they left that evening, I stood on the porch and watched them drive away in their modest car. For once, I didn't see shame in their faces. I saw resolve, and I realized the change I had demanded was no longer just possible, it had begun. 3 months passed before I truly believed the change was real. Each week I received no requests for handouts. No late night calls begging for rescues. Instead, Claire called just to check in, her voice tired but steady, full of stories about long shifts and small victories. Nathan stopped avoiding me and began asking for advice. Not money about interviews, budgets, and how to mend what pride had broken. The children flourished. Grace bounded into my house one Saturday morning, wearing a soccer uniform. Her knees scuffed, her smile wide. She dropped a medal into my lap and said, "I scored the winning goal." Noah followed with his report card, a line of A's and a note from his teacher, praising his new confidence. I taped it to my refrigerator. At our monthly family dinners, the air felt lighter. Claire would bring a casserole she'd made herself, apologizing if it wasn't perfect. Nathan would sit across from me, not as a rival, but as a man finally humbled, asking about ways to save for the future. He never bragged anymore. He listened, and sometimes, when the kids weren't looking, he'd murmur a quiet, "Has wife you?" One evening, Claire set an envelope on the table. Inside was their household budget, neat columns and penciled notes. "We're covering everything now, Dad," she said. "The mortgage, the bills, even a small emergency fund. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're standing on our own feet." They have. Tears pricked my eyes. For years I had begged them to understand, and now they finally did. The children, though, gave me the clearest sign. They handed me homemade cards, bright with markers and glitter. Noah's said, "Thank you for taking care of us, even when Mom and Dad forgot to a ditty." Grace's was simpler. "I love you, Grandpa." They have. I kept those cards in my study, beside Margaret's picture. When I looked at them, I knew she would be proud not of the money I spent, but of the family that had grown through struggle into gratitude. Claire and Nathan began talking about selling the big house someday, buying something smaller they could manage alone, not out of shame, but out of wisdom. For the first time in 15 years, they wanted to prove themselves. One evening, as the sun set and we stood on my porch, Noah asked, "Grandpa, are you proud of us now?" I looked at the four of them, my daughter who had learned humility, my son-in-law who had swallowed his pride, my grandchildren who had found gratitude, and I said, "Yes, more than you'll ever know." Kenna. They drove away in their old car, laughter spilling from the windows, and somehow, that car looked less like a downgrade and more like a new beginning. I stood alone in the quiet street, the glow of dusk washing over me. My heart was steady, my soul at peace. Because sometimes, the deepest love is not in saving someone again and again, but in letting them learn to stand without you. Sometimes, the only way to keep a promise is to finally let go.